Eva Larkin's day began as usual at 6:30 in the morning. She went downstairs to the first floor of her small two-story house, turned on the coffee maker, and took out the eggs for her omelet. Tyler was already showering upstairs. His workday started earlier. 15 years of living together had taught them a certain routine. She made breakfast, he grabbed a couple of bites and rushed off to work. Eva had been working as a medical equipment technician for 12 years. The job required attention to detail and a good memory. Each machine had its own quirks, and she kept hundreds of nuances in her head. Today she had 3 scheduled inspections at the city hospital and 1 urgent call to a private clinic. Tyler came downstairs, already dressed in his usual dark blue suit. In 15 years at a construction company, he had risen to become a leading bridge design engineer. Eva placed a plate of omelet and a cup of coffee in front of him. "I'll be late today. I have an important meeting with contractors," he said, chewing hastily. "Did you remember dinner at your father's?" Eva nodded. On Thursdays, they traditionally had dinner at Wilford's, ever since her mother died 3 years ago. Usually, their small group gathered there, her, Tyler, her father, and the Stevens, old friends of the family. Their daughter Rosalie often joined them if she wasn't busy. Eva remembered meeting Rosalie at one of these gatherings when she had just started dating Tyler. Rosalie was 20 at the time, had just started college, and had big plans for the future. The bright, confident girl immediately won her over. They quickly became friends despite the slight age difference. When Tyler proposed to Eva a year later, Rosalie was her maid of honor. Tyler finished his coffee and got up from the table. He kissed Eva on the cheek and headed for the door. She looked out the window as his silver Ford pulled out of the driveway. The day began as usual. There were many calls at work. The X-ray machine at a private clinic needed serious repairs. Parts had to be ordered. Eva methodically filled out documents, communicated with suppliers, and checked the equipment. At lunchtime, her father called to remind her about dinner and ask her to come home early to help set the table. After selling his chain of auto repair shops 5 years ago, he often felt lonely and loved it when his daughter kept him company. That was why she and Tyler had bought a house not far from him, to be closer. In the evening, getting ready to go to her father's, Eva took a dark green dress out of the closet. It was a gift from Rosalie for her last birthday. She always had good taste. They had seen each other less often lately. Rosalie had been busy at work in the lab, and her personal life didn't seem to be going well. A month ago, she had broken up with her latest boyfriend. Eva looked at herself in the mirror. At 42, she still looked good. She was slim, with chestnut hair just below her shoulders and almost no wrinkles. Only her eyes showed some fatigue, perhaps from her unfulfilled dream of having children. After a miscarriage 5 years ago, the doctors said she would never have children. But life went on. She had a job she loved, a caring husband, and a wonderful relationship with her father and friends. It seemed that nothing could change. Spring this year was rainy. Eva was returning from work in a light, unpleasant rain, wondering what to make for dinner. Tyler had been staying late at work a lot lately. The new bridge required a lot of attention and effort. At least, that's what he said. She parked at home and noticed that there was something in the mailbox. She took it out, utility bills and a glossy advertising brochure. Tyler usually picked up the mail in the morning. It was strange that he had forgotten today. He was always very punctual about little things. At home, Eva's first task was to check the answering machine. 3 missed calls from work and 1 from Tyler. "I'll be late tonight. Don't wait up for dinner." His voice sounded different somehow. Maybe he was just tired. He had been coming home after midnight a lot lately, saying that he had a difficult project with a tight deadline. Eva heated up some frozen lasagna and sat down to eat alone. She remembered how they used to cook together. Tyler loved to experiment in the kitchen on weekends. Now he was increasingly skipping even family dinners at his father's house, citing work. The phone rang. It was her father. "How are you, daughter? Is Tyler working again?" "Yes, he has an important project." "You know, I think he's been working too much lately. Maybe you should talk to him." "Everything's fine, Dad. He's just going through a difficult period." After talking to her father, Eva sat in the living room with a book for a long time, but she couldn't concentrate on reading. Something had changed recently, but she couldn't put her finger on it. Tyler had become distracted, often getting distracted by his phone during conversations. Once she noticed that he had changed his phone password, for the first time in their entire marriage. On Thursday, everyone except Tyler gathered at her father's house for dinner. Rosalie came, though. She hadn't missed a single gathering in the last couple of months. She used to always find reasons not to come: work, dates, or just feeling unwell. But now it was as if she was deliberately freeing up her Thursdays. "How's work?" Ava asked, helping Rosalie set the table. "Same as usual. Tests, samples, reports." Rosalie spoke quickly, avoiding eye contact. "Why isn't Tyler here?" "He's working late. He has an important project." "Yes," he said. Rosalie stopped short and quickly turned away to the sideboard for plates. Eva froze with the napkins in her hands. When had Tyler had time to tell Rosalie about his project? He hadn't been at dinner last week either. Maybe they had run into each other somewhere in town. At dinner, Rosalie was unusually lively, joking a lot and telling funny stories from work. Eva caught herself thinking that she didn't recognize her friend. Where had her usual reserve gone? And that new dress was too bright for a family dinner. Her makeup was brighter than usual. In the evening, when everyone had left, her father stopped Eva at the door. "Rosalie seems strange today, don't you think?" "Yes, a little. She was like that last week, too. It's as if she's trying to be the center of attention." On the way home, Ava thought about their last few encounters. Rosalie had indeed changed. She had started showing up more often at family gatherings and talking more, as if trying to make up for something, or distract herself from something. The house was dark and empty. Tyler sent a message saying he would be late. Ava took a box of old photographs out of the closet. For some reason, she wanted to look at pictures from their wedding. Here they were with Tyler cutting the cake. Here they were dancing their first dance. Here was a group photo with the guests. Rosalie was standing next to the bride, happy and beautiful in her blue bridesmaid's dress. Eva put the album away. Something had changed in their lives, but she couldn't or didn't want to understand what it was yet. Tyler came home after midnight smelling of cigarettes, even though he had quit smoking 5 years ago. He said his colleagues had been smoking in the office during a meeting. Eva pretended to believe him. The next day, she went into her husband's office looking for a stapler. In the wastebasket, she found a crumpled receipt from a cafe they had never been to. It was too far from his work. 2 coffees and 2 desserts. The time on the receipt was 2 p.m., the middle of the workday. Eva carefully smoothed out the receipt and put it in her pocket. In the evening, Rosalie's mother called and invited them over for Sunday dinner. Eva wanted to decline. She wasn't in the mood, but Tyler suddenly got excited about the idea. "We haven't seen the Stevens in a long time. We should definitely go." In the past, she had to persuade him to go on such visits. On Sunday, Rosalie arrived at her parents' house dressed to the nines, with a new hairstyle and expensive perfume. Throughout dinner, she studiously avoided looking at Tyler, but Eva noticed how they exchanged quick glances when they thought no one was looking. That night, Eva couldn't sleep for a long time. Fragments of conversations, random details, little things that had previously seemed insignificant swirled around in her head. She didn't dare put them together yet. The picture that might emerge seemed too frightening. The last week had been particularly busy at work. New equipment had been installed at the city hospital and required regular checks. Eva left early to check the equipment in several departments before lunchtime. At the other end of town, in a private clinic, she was expected at 2 o'clock. The X-ray machine was malfunctioning. The morning was hectic. 3 machines needed adjusting. Nurses were constantly asking questions, and the head of the department wanted a written report. Eva barely managed to finish her paperwork by 1 o'clock. She got into her car and figured out the route to the private clinic. The navigation system suggested going through the city center, but there were always traffic jams there. She decided to take a shortcut through an industrial area. The road was worse there, but less congested. The day was surprisingly warm for April. Eva rolled down the window, letting the fresh spring air into the car. Her thoughts revolved around her morning conversation with Tyler. He said he had an important meeting with contractors at the office today and asked her not to wait for him for dinner. He sounded uncertain and kept looking away. The industrial area greeted her with its usual scene: gray fences, warehouses, and few pedestrians. Next to one of the warehouses was a small parking lot for employees, usually half empty at this time of day. Eva slowed down at the traffic light and automatically glanced at the parked cars. Her heart skipped a beat. Tyler's silver Ford was parked in the far corner. She blinked several times, unable to believe her eyes. The traffic light turned green, and the car behind her honked impatiently. Eva turned on her turn signal and slowly pulled into the parking lot. She parked a few spaces away from her husband's car and turned off the engine. Her hands were shaking. What was Tyler doing here in an industrial area when he was supposed to be at a meeting at the office? His company's office was in the business district on the other side of town. The car was parked in the far corner of the parking lot, partially hidden by a delivery van. Eva drove slowly past, pretending to look for a parking space. Through the fogged-up windows of the Ford, she saw moving silhouettes in the back seat. The characteristic rocking of the car left no doubt as to what was happening. She parked a few spaces away from them and turned off the engine. Her hands were shaking. In the rearview mirror, she could clearly see the silver Ford. When a particularly strong movement inside caused the car to sway, Eva recognized Rosalie's profile. She was wearing the same bright dress she had worn at the last family dinner. Eva didn't remember how long she sat there. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe an hour. She was brought back to her senses by the ringing of her phone. The clinic administrator was asking when she would be arriving. Eva mechanically replied something about traffic and promised to be there in half an hour. She started the car, turned around, and drove out of the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, she saw the silver Ford swaying on its springs. The car was empty and cold, despite the warm spring day. She drove to the clinic on autopilot. Her hands remembered what to do: check the settings, calibrate the machine, fill out the paperwork. Her head was surprisingly clear, as if everything that had happened to someone else. Eva returned home late in the evening. Tyler wasn't there yet. He must have gone to the office to see the contractors. She methodically did all her usual evening chores, took a shower, made the bed, checked her email. She couldn't eat, though. She couldn't get a bite down. Tyler came home around 11, smelling of cologne, too strong, as if he was trying to cover something up. He kissed her on the cheek and asked how her day had been. Eva replied with something neutral about work. He didn't notice anything strange in her behavior, or pretended not to. At night, she lay awake, remembering all the strange things that had happened over the last few months: the frequent delays at work, the changed password on her phone, Rosalie's new behavior. It all fit together into a clear picture that she had been trying so hard not to see before. In the morning, she got up as usual, made Tyler breakfast, and got ready for work. Only this time, the omelet didn't turn out right. It burned while she stared out the window with a blank look. Tyler didn't notice. He hurriedly swallowed his breakfast and rushed off to work, or maybe not to work. Eva sat at the table for a long time, staring at his empty plate. 15 years of marriage, mutual friends, shared memories, plans for the future, and Rosalie, the maid of honor at their wedding, the daughter of their closest friends. How could this have happened? The next few days passed in a fog for Eva. She got up, made breakfast, went to work, everything as usual. Tyler didn't seem to notice anything, or he pretended not to notice her aloofness, her mechanical movements, her empty gaze. At work, she tried to keep herself busy. She took on extra calls and volunteered to check equipment in the farthest corners of the hospital. Her colleagues were surprised by her sudden workaholism, but they chalked it up to spring fever. On Wednesday, she almost ruined an expensive piece of equipment. She got distracted and mixed up the settings. Luckily, she noticed her mistake in time. The department head looked at her suspiciously for a long time, but said nothing. It was becoming unbearable at home, especially in the evenings. Tyler was staying late at work more and more often. She used to worry, call him, ask when he was coming home. Now she just poured herself a glass of wine and sat down in front of the TV. One glass, then another, until she didn't care anymore. One day, she found his shirt in the laundry basket with a faint trace of lipstick on the collar. It was the same shade Rosalie wore. Eva mechanically threw the shirt into the wash with the rest of his clothes. Her hands were shaking so much that she spilled the laundry detergent. That evening, she got really drunk for the first time. Tyler was working late again. She took the bottle of whiskey her father had given her husband for Christmas last year out of the bar. She sat down in the kitchen, staring out the dark window. The first sip burned her throat. The second went down easier. After the third, her head started spinning. The phone was ringing off the hook, first Tyler, then her father, then Tyler again. She didn't answer. What difference did it make now? The whiskey was gone before she knew it. She found a bottle of cognac in the bar. She woke up on the kitchen floor. It was dawn outside. Her head was splitting, and her mouth was as dry as a desert. The answering machine flashed red with missed calls. Tyler never came home. She went to work without breakfast. The taste of yesterday's alcohol lingered in her mouth all day. Her colleagues diligently pretended not to notice her disheveled appearance and red eyes. At lunchtime, Rosalie called, acting as if nothing had happened, and asked if they would be coming to her father's for dinner on Thursday. Eva politely replied that yes, of course they would. She hung up and sat staring at the wall for a long time. Then she went to the bathroom and threw up. In the evening, she bought 2 bottles of wine on her way home. Tyler wrote that he was running late again. She didn't reply. She turned up the music, the very song they had danced to at their wedding. She opened the first bottle. In the morning at work, she snapped at a young nurse who had simply asked if everything was okay with the CT scanner. Eva cursed at her, then apologized profusely. Her hands were shaking so much that she couldn't get the screwdriver into the screw. She started coming home later and later, stopping at the supermarket for wine, drinking in her car, driving around town until it got dark. Once she drove past that warehouse. The silver Ford wasn't there. They must have found a new meeting place. On Friday evening, she almost got into an accident. She was lost in thought while driving and ran a red light. There was the screech of brakes and drivers cursing. She apologized mechanically and parked on the side of the road. She took the flask of cognac out of the glove compartment, which she now always carried with her. Tyler started asking questions. Why did she smell of alcohol? Why wasn't she answering her calls? Was everything okay? She smiled and said that everything was fine. She was just tired from work. He pretended to believe her. Her father also noticed the change. He called more often than usual, asking if she needed help. She dismissed him, saying it was just the spring blues and it would pass soon. She canceled the traditional family dinners twice. She couldn't bear to see Rosalie sitting at the same table with her husband, smiling and laughing at his jokes. At work, she now kept a bottle of gin in her desk, just in case. Sometimes she added a little to her morning coffee to keep her hands from shaking. After lunch, she always freshened her breath with mint candies. Evenings became a ritual. Wine, music, old photographs. She spent a long time looking at their wedding pictures. There they were with Tyler cutting the cake, so happy and young. There was Rosalie in her blue bridesmaid's dress, still an innocent girl who had just started college. One morning she caught her reflection in the mirror, her face gaunt, circles under her eyes, her gaze dull. In the closet she found the green dress Rosalie had given her. She tried it on. It now hung like a sack. She had lost a lot of weight over the last month. Tyler continued his charade, calling to ask how she was doing and kissing her on the cheek before leaving for work. She played along, smiling, making breakfast and asking about his day. But now every touch made her feel sick. Every kiss tasted bitter. On Monday, she couldn't take it anymore and called Rosalie's cell phone. She didn't answer. 5 minutes later, a message came. "Sorry, I'm in a meeting. I'll call you back later." Ava deleted the message, then blocked the number. In the evening, she sat in the kitchen until late, finishing the last of the whiskey. Fragments of thoughts swirled in her head. How long had this been going on? Why Rosalie? What had she done wrong? Maybe if she had been able to have a child. The ringing of the phone snapped her out of her stupor. It was her father. She didn't answer. She finished her whiskey and took an open bottle of wine out of the refrigerator. She didn't pour it into a glass, drinking straight from the bottle. She didn't turn on the music, sitting in the dark, listening to the ticking of the clock. Tyler returned after midnight. He smelled of her perfume. She recognized the scent. Rosalie always used it. He said something about a long meeting, a difficult project. She nodded without listening. Her ears were ringing from the alcohol. In the morning, she struggled to get up for work. Her head was splitting. Her hands were shaking so much that she couldn't get the key into the ignition. She found a flask of cognac in the glove compartment. One sip, then another, then a third. She felt a little better. At work, she mechanically performed her usual tasks, checking equipment, filling out paperwork, answering phone calls. Only now, every break she took was to go to the bathroom, to take a swig of gin from the bottle in her desk, freshen her breath, and touch up her lipstick. By evening, she was shaking. She took a detour home, stopped at the supermarket for wine, then drove around the city for a long time. She didn't dare drive past the warehouse. There were too many memories there now. Eva was late for dinner with her family. Sitting behind the wheel, she glanced at her watch. It was 6:45. There was a flask of cognac in the glove compartment. Eva took a sip, then another. She wasn't getting drunk, just trying to give herself some courage. It had become a habit over the last month. She parked behind Tyler's silver Ford at her father's house. That meant everyone was there. She took out her lipstick and touched up her lips. The mirror reflected her tired face with unnaturally shiny eyes. Her father opened the door and looked at her intently. Ava tried to smile as naturally as possible. It seemed to work. He only frowned slightly as he let her into the house. Everyone was indeed gathered in the living room, the Stevens, Tyler, and Rosalie. The latter was sitting in Eva's favorite chair, which, for some reason, particularly bothered her. However, everything about her behavior was irritating at the moment. Dinner began as usual. Conversations about work, the weather, and the latest news. Eva silently poked at her plate with her fork, occasionally taking a sip from her wine glass. Anger slowly boiled inside her. How could they sit there, smiling, pretending that everything was fine? "Eva, you're so quiet tonight," Rosalie's mother remarked. "I just don't have anything to say," Eva said, taking another sip of wine. Her glass was already empty for the third time. Rosalie was talking animatedly about something, and Tyler was laughing at her jokes. They were careful not to look at each other, but Eva noticed the fleeting glances, the feigned indifference in their communication. "Do you remember when you were a bridesmaid at my wedding?" she asked suddenly, interrupting Rosalie's story. An awkward silence hung in the room. "Of course I remember," Rosalie replied cautiously. It was a beautiful wedding. Yes, beautiful. You were so innocent then. Or are you no longer? Ava! Her father turned to her indignantly. What? I'm just asking. I wonder when exactly our dear Rosalie turned into a whore. Rosalie jumped up so abruptly that she knocked over her glass. Wine spilled across the snow-white tablecloth in a red stain. The sound of a slap echoed through the room. Eva slowly turned her head, feeling her cheek burn. Her father froze with a fork in his hand, looking at his daughter with horror and pain. He had only seen her like this once before, after she had miscarried. What had happened now? The Stevens tried to calm Rosalie, who was sobbing. Tyler sat pale, clutching the edge of the table, and Eva suddenly laughed, bitterly, viciously. The truth hurts, doesn't it? Enough! Her father slammed his palm on the table. Everyone out! Eva, you stay. No, I'll leave myself, she said, standing up, swaying slightly. The cognac and wine were finally taking effect. I said stay. His voice was so steely that she silently sank back into her chair. The others hurriedly said goodbye, avoiding each other's gaze. Only Rosalie, passing by, glanced at her with a look full of hatred and fear. When everyone had left, her father silently poured himself a whiskey. He sat down opposite his daughter. His hands were trembling slightly. What's going on, Ava? She shook her head, biting her lip. No, she wouldn't tell him. Not today. Let him figure it out himself. He had always been damn perceptive. I'm fine. Just tired. Don't lie to me. I haven't seen you like this since— Don't, she said abruptly. I'm going home. In a taxi. He watched her search her purse for her phone and dial the number. His smart, strong girl, who had coped with the loss of a child, with the news of infertility, with all the blows of fate. What could have broken her now? I'll call you tomorrow, he said as she stood in the doorway. Eva nodded without turning around. There was a lump in her throat, but she would cry at home. Alone. As always. Wilford hadn't slept all night. He sat in his office, twirling a glass of whiskey in his hands and reminiscing. 5 years ago, Eva had called in the middle of the night, her voice dry and unfamiliar, to tell him she had lost the baby. He and his wife had rushed to the hospital, but their daughter had refused to see them. Tyler met them in the hallway, confused and depressed. Then the hard days began. Eva locked herself in the house, didn't answer the phone, didn't open the door. She just drank. They found empty bottles when they managed to get into the apartment. Tyler didn't know what to do. The psychologist said it would take time. But time passed, and things didn't get any better. When the doctor said there would be no more children, Eva didn't even cry. She just nodded and left the office. Then she disappeared for 3 days. She turned off her phone and didn't show up at home. Tyler and he called all the hospitals, morgues. They found her in a small hotel on the outskirts of town. She was sitting on the bed, sober, calm, with empty eyes. Wilford remembered how his daughter had slowly climbed out of depression. She went back to work and started smiling again. Tyler was there for her, supporting her as best he could. They got through it, the whole family. And now he saw the same emptiness, the same pain in her eyes again. Something had happened, something so serious that it had driven his strong girl to a breakdown. He had to find out what it was. In the morning, Wilford called his old friend, a private investigator. He was about to retire but agreed to help. He started small, checking phone calls, bank accounts, travel routes. The first clues appeared quickly. Tyler was renting rooms at a motel on the outskirts of town, not where Eva had been found, but in another one further from the center. He paid in cash, but cameras had recorded his car, and he wasn't alone. Wilford looked at the photos taken by a surveillance camera in the motel parking lot. Tyler's silver Ford. Rosalie getting out of the car, looking around hurriedly. the time and date in the corner of the photo. The detective continued digging. Phone calls, text messages via messengers, meetings in cafes on the other side of town, coincidences in the schedule of business trips, and delays at work. Everything fit together. His son-in-law, whom he loved like a son, was having an affair with his best friend's daughter, with the girl who was a bridesmaid at his wedding. Wilford poured himself another whiskey. He remembered how Tyler had asked Eva to marry him, how he had sworn to love and protect her, how he had supported her after the miscarriage, or pretended to support her. The doorbell rang. A detective stood on the doorstep with a new folder of documents. Camera footage, printouts of phone calls, photographs. Everything was clear, professional, emotionless. Just facts. Wilford studied the papers. He pieced the events together into a clear picture. Eva must have suspected something. Maybe she saw them together. Maybe she found evidence. That's why she started drinking. That's why she lost it at dinner. He remembered her eyes. Empty, sick, just like after the miscarriage. Only now the pain was different. Back then, they lost a child. A tragedy, but no one was to blame. And now she had been betrayed by the people closest to her. The detective left, leaving the folder on the table. Wilford looked at the photos. His brother-in-law and Rosalie, entering a motel together, leaving a cafe together, getting into a car. Dates, times, places. Evidence that couldn't be denied. He took out his phone and found his lawyer's number. He answered on the first ring. They had been friends for many years. "I need to make some urgent changes to my will." The lawyer said something about procedures, deadlines, documents. Wilford listened half-heartedly. He looked at the photo on the table, his and his wife's silver wedding anniversary, the whole family together. Eva was smiling at the camera. Tyler had his arm around her shoulders. Rosalie was standing nearby, laughing at some joke. Everything was fine then, or had they simply not noticed how everything was falling apart? When had his little girl started drinking? When had she realized that her husband was cheating on her? Why hadn't she come to him and told him? Wilford carefully placed the documents in a folder. He poured himself a last glass of whiskey. Tomorrow he had to meet with his lawyer to change his will, and then talk to his son-in-law. He had to know that Wilford knew everything, and that there would be consequences. 5 years ago, the whole family had helped Eve cope with the loss of her child. Now she needed support again, and he wouldn't let anyone, not even his beloved son-in-law, hurt his little girl. Wilford called Tyler to his office early in the morning. He called the construction company and said he needed to discuss something urgently. Tyler rushed over, not even bothering to tie his tie properly. He probably thought his father-in-law wanted to talk about Eva's behavior at dinner. In his office, Wilford motioned his son-in-law to a chair and sat down at the desk. He laid out a folder of documents in front of him, neatly and slowly. "Tyler, I've always considered you an honest man," he began, looking his son-in-law in the eye. Tyler shifted in his chair but didn't look away. "Of course, Wilford. Don't interrupt." Wilford's voice remained calm, but Tyler fell silent. "I want you to look at something." He began laying photos on the table, one after another, methodically, as if he were playing solitaire. Tyler paled when he saw the first picture. By the last one, his hands were shaking noticeably. "I can explain," he said hoarsely. "You can," Wilford agreed. "But you won't, because any explanation would be a lie, like everything you've said for the last few months." He took out more documents, printouts of phone calls, motel bills, surveillance camera footage. Tyler sat with his head down. "I changed my will," Wilford said matter-of-factly, as if he were reporting the weather. "Eva gets everything, you get nothing." "That's your right," Tyler replied hollowly. "Yes, it's my right, just as it's my right to protect my daughter. Do you remember what she was like after she miscarried?" Tyler nodded. His face took on an unhealthy gray hue. I see the same pain in her eyes now, the same emptiness. But there's a difference. Back then, no one was to blame. Now, Wilford fell silent, staring out the window. Outside, the branches of an old oak tree swayed in the wind. He had planted it when Eva was born. I'm not going to interfere in your relationship. That's between you and Eva. But remember, if you cause her any more pain, if I see her in that state again. He turned to his son-in-law. There was no anger in Wilford's eyes, only cold determination. There are a lot of canals in this city, Tyler, and some are deep enough to hide a body. Tyler shuddered. He knew his father-in-law well enough to understand that this was not an empty threat. You can go, Wilford began, gathering the photos back into the folder. And tell Rosalie to stay away from my family. Tyler stood up, staggering slightly. He turned at the door, wanting to say something but changed his mind. He just nodded and left. Wilford took the will out of his desk drawer. Everything had been drawn up correctly. His lawyer had seen to that. The house, the accounts, the shares, everything would go to Eve. Tyler would get nothing except what he had earned himself. He had no intention of telling his daughter about this conversation. He didn't want to give her false hope. Threats and disinheritance were unlikely to bring love back into their marriage. But he had to protect her, at least in this way, at least financially. The phone on the table vibrated, a message from his lawyer. All the documents had been drawn up and copies sent to the appropriate parties. Wilford nodded with satisfaction. Now, all he had to do was wait and hope that his little girl would find the strength to survive this betrayal. He looked at the photos once more before putting them away in the safe. His beloved son-in-law and the daughter of his best friends. What a cruel irony. But Wilford had long since learned that there was no room for sentimentality when it came to protecting his family. And Eva was his only family, all he had left after his wife's death. He closed the safe and checked the lock. Tyler wasn't stupid. He had to understand that the threat was real. And if he didn't, well, there were a lot of canals in the city. Wilford arranged different times for everyone. He didn't want anyone to have time to warn the others. He invited James and Margaret over early, ostensibly to discuss business. Tyler and Rosalie would come later, separately. He asked Eve to come at 8. First, he showed the Stevens the photos and printouts. James was silent for a long time, looking at the pictures, then sighed heavily. So that's what it is. I've been wondering why she's been acting so strange these past few months. I was even thinking of taking her to a psychologist. Margaret quietly sobbed, but quickly pulled herself together. Wilford knew she wasn't the crying type. She and James had raised Rosalie on their own, without nannies or grandmothers, while they were building their business. The others arrived shortly after. Rosalie paled when she saw her parents. Tyler stood awkwardly in the doorway. Eva was the last to enter, calm and composed, only her fingers nervously fingering the strap of her bag. Wilford began to speak. He calmly laid out the facts and showed the evidence. Rosalie tried to explain, but her father cut her off. Be quiet. Let me finish. When Wilford finished, a heavy silence hung in the office. James was the first to speak. Tyler, get out. You too, Rosalie, wait in the living room. Waiting for them to leave, he turned to Eva. How long have you known? A month. I saw them, by accident. And you started drinking? Yes. James nodded. He and Wilford exchanged glances, both remembering how they had helped Eva out of depression after her miscarriage. Eva, Margaret approached her. I'm sorry. We didn't realize. Don't. Eva pulled away. This isn't your fault. Wilford looked at his old friends. 30 years ago, he and James had started a business in a garage. Wilford repaired cars. James did the accounting. Then the business grew, and they opened their first workshop. Margaret helped with the paperwork and looked after little Ava while the men worked. When Rosalie was born, They all looked after the girls together. I'm filing for divorce, Eva said quietly. James nodded. That's right. And Rosalie, we'll sort things out with her ourselves. Maybe we should send her to her aunt in Denver, Margaret said matter-of-factly without emotion. Let her live there for a while and think things over. No, Wilford said firmly. Let her stay. It's their business. Let them figure it out. James raised his eyebrows in surprise. Wilford smiled. What are you looking at? Do you think I'm a complete old fool? You can't throw away 30 years of friendship because our children have done something stupid. But what about nothing? Eva is filing for divorce. That's her right. Rosalie will have to live with her choice. That's her business. Are we going to stop talking to each other because of them? He stood up and paced around the office. Remember how you helped me after Mary died? I almost ruined the business back then. You sat with me for a week sorting out the bills and taking care of things. James nodded. Margaret said quietly, and when we had a fire in the workshop and the insurance didn't cover it, who lent us the money so we wouldn't go bankrupt? Exactly. Wilford sat back down in his chair. So enough drama. Yes, it won't be easy for the children, but it's their life, their choice. And we'll just be there for them, like we always have been. Eva looked at her father with wide eyes. He winked at her. What did you think the old man had completely lost his mind? Decided to turn everyone against each other. I thought, don't think. Go home, get a divorce, and stop drinking. It doesn't suit you. When Eva left, he turned to his friends. Well, shall we call those lovebirds? Let them get what they deserve. The conversation with Tyler and Rosalie was difficult. James told his daughter everything he thought. Margaret remained silent. She would speak later, at home. Wilford simply reminded his son-in-law of their morning conversation. Late in the evening, when everyone had left, the three of them sat in the study. James opened a bottle of whiskey. Remember how we chose this brand for your wedding? I remember. We went to 3 stores. And I remember how you both ended up rolling around under the table, Margaret snorted. We had to put you in a taxi. They laughed. Then James became serious. Thank you for not letting our friendship fall apart. Wilford shrugged. Come on, I'm just old and wise. You're just an old bore. Margaret tapped him lightly on the shoulder. Okay, let's go home, deal with our heroine. At the door, James turned around. Saturday as usual? Let's go fix your car? Sure, but you're buying the whiskey. When his friends left, Wilford stood at the window for a long time. Yes, it would be difficult for the children. Yes, there would be a lot of pain, hurt, and tears. But they would get through it. They had to. And he and James would just be there for them, just like they had for the past 30 years. Tyler insisted on visits to a family psychologist. Eva agreed more out of exhaustion than anything else. It was easier to nod than to argue. The psychologist turned out to be a young woman with a soft voice and an attentive gaze. She suggested talking to each of them separately first. With Eva, they talked about trust, betrayal, and how to cope with pain. Eva answered in monosyllables, thinking only of the flask in her purse. After the session, she went straight to the bar across the street. At the joint meetings, Tyler talked a lot about how sorry he was, how he wanted to fix everything and start over. Eva was silent, staring at her hands. There was still a white mark on her ring finger from her wedding ring. She had taken it off the night she saw him with Rosalie. Eva, you need to participate in the dialogue too, the psychologist insisted gently. Tell us how you feel. Nothing, Eva shrugged. I just want it all to end. After the 3rd session, she couldn't take it anymore and said everything that had been building up inside her. How disgusting it was to see his feigned concern. How his touch made her sick. How she didn't believe a word he said. That's good, the psychologist nodded. It's important to let your emotions out. But it didn't get any easier. Eva continued to drink, now not because of the pain, but simply out of habit. In the morning, she added cognac to her coffee. During the day, she drank from a flask, and in the evening, she fell asleep with a glass of wine. Tyler didn't notice right away, but when he did, he started watching her, hiding bottles and pouring out the contents of the flask. Eva just laughed and bought a new one. That evening, she drank more than usual. She sat in the kitchen, drinking whiskey straight from the bottle and looking at old photos. There they were with Tyler on their wedding day, young, happy, in love. There was Rosalie next to them, a radiant bridesmaid in a blue dress. The room slowly spun before her eyes. Eva reached for the bottle and missed. It fell and shattered. Shards scattered across the floor, whiskey spilled in a puddle. She tried to get up to clean it up, but her legs wouldn't obey her. Her head was spinning. She reached for a shard and cut herself. Blood dripped onto the photo, spreading into red smears. Tyler found her there, sitting on the floor among the shards and photographs. Silently, he helped her up, cleaned the cut, and put her to bed. He sat beside her all night while she tossed and turned in a drunken stupor. In the morning, Eva woke up with a raging headache. Tyler was asleep in a chair by the bed, haggard and unshaven. For a second, she felt sorry for him. "Why did you stay?" He flinched and opened his eyes. "I was worried about you." "Don't worry about me. I'm filing for divorce." "Eva, please." "No. Enough. I'm tired of pretending." He tried to argue, begged for another chance. He said he loved her, that he would fix everything. Eva was silent, staring out the window. She didn't go to the next session, or the one after that. The psychologist called. Tyler begged her to come back, but she was adamant. "You can't glue something back together that's completely broken," she told her husband, "even if you try really hard." He didn't give up. He brought her flowers, cooked dinner, tried to take care of her. Once, when she was particularly drunk, he hid all the sharp objects. Another time, he called an ambulance, afraid that she wasn't coming to. Eva watched his efforts with a kind of detached interest. It was as if she were watching someone else's life in a movie. Only alcohol helped her feel alive. "You're killing yourself," Tyler said once. "Don't you care?" "No, I still love you." That's a strange way to love someone, sleeping with someone else. He flinched and looked away, and she suddenly realized that she really didn't care. There was no more pain, no more jealousy, not even anger, only fatigue and a desire for it all to end quickly. "I found an apartment," she said one morning. "I'm moving next week." Tyler was silent for a long time, then nodded. "Okay, I'll help you with your things." "No, I'll manage." That evening, she got drunk for the last time, sitting on the floor of her empty bedroom surrounded by packed boxes. Tyler was there again, silent, just watching to make sure she didn't do anything stupid. In the morning, while gathering her things in the bathroom, Eva found a box of hair clips in the drawer, small, delicate clips that Tyler had bought her last year when she was growing out her bangs. He had gone out of his way to stop by the store near work. She had complained that her hair was getting in her eyes and making it difficult to work with the appliances. "You can keep them," Tyler said from the doorway. She silently poured the hair clips into her makeup bag. What difference did it make now? They were just trinkets from a past life. Rosalie moved in with her aunt in a neighboring area, not in Denver as her mother had suggested, but she didn't stay in her parents' house either. Aunt Martha, her father's sister, took her in without asking any questions. She just said she wouldn't judge her, but she wouldn't approve either. For the first week, Rosalie didn't dare call her parents. She changed jobs and got a position at a private laboratory on the other side of town. The pay was lower, but at least there was no chance of bumping into Ava or her father. On Sunday, she finally plucked up the courage to drive to her parents' house. She sat in the car for a long time, gathering her courage. Margaret opened the door but didn't invite her in, standing on the threshold and looking over her daughter's head. "How are you?" "Fine," her mother said, pursing her lips. "Did you want something?" "To talk. Can I come in?" "Your father isn't home." "When will he be back?" "Rosalie," Margaret finally looked her in the eyes. "Don't come over, not yet." "Mom, I'm your daughter. That's why it hurts so much." The door closed. Rosalie stood on the porch for a while longer, then slowly walked back to her car. 3 days later, she tried to catch her father at his auto parts store. James was just coming out of his office when he saw her and turned abruptly away. His secretary spread her hands apologetically. "He's busy." The next time she came, she brought flowers, her mother's favorite peonies. Margaret took the bouquet, but didn't let her in the house again. She just asked, "Are you still seeing him?" Rosalie shook her head. She really hadn't seen Tyler since that memorable evening at Wilford's. Her mother nodded. "Good, but it's still too soon." At work, Rosalie mechanically performed analyses, wrote reports, and talked to her colleagues. No one knew her story. Here she was, just a new employee, a little withdrawn and sad. Once she accidentally saw Eva in a shopping mall. She was coming out of a wine shop. She hid behind a pillar and waited. At home, she cried for a long time, remembering how they used to go shopping together, chat and laugh. The following Sunday, she went to her parents' house again. This time, her father opened the door. "Dad, go away. Please, let's talk." "About what?" He looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. "About how you ruined my friendship with Wilford? Or about how you disgraced our family?" "Our friendship isn't ruined. He said so himself. Yes, Wilford turned out to be wiser than all of us. But that doesn't change what you did." James paused, then added, "You've always been the pride of our family, smart, beautiful, successful, and now I can't look people in the eye. I loved him." "Loved him?" Her father smiled bitterly. "And did he love you? Enough to leave his wife and family? Or were you just a diversion?" Rosalie was silent. What could she say? That Tyler had never promised her a future? That their meetings were just that, hurried, secret, filled with fear of being discovered? "When you're ready to answer these questions honestly," her father said, "then come back. Until then, don't bother." She returned a week later with a homemade pie, her mother's favorite. She knocked on the back door, which was always open, but it turned out that the lock had been changed. Aunt Martha said that she needed to give her parents time, that they loved her, but right now they were hurting and ashamed, that everything would work out, maybe not soon, but it would work out. Rosalie nodded, but deep down she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. She had made a choice for which she would have to pay, and the highest price was not her lost reputation or ruined career, but the alienation of those closest to her. On Sunday, she returned to her parents' house. This time, she just stood at the gate, not daring to enter. Her mother's shadow flashed in the window. She must have seen her, but didn't come out. Rosalie left an envelope with a letter on the porch and left. She didn't know if her parents would read her explanation and apology. She didn't know if they would ever forgive her. She only knew that she would try again and again until one day the door would open. The divorce proceedings went surprisingly smoothly. Tyler didn't argue about the property and agreed to all of Eva's terms. The house was sold. Neither of them wanted to stay there. The money was divided equally. Eva rented a small apartment near her work and Tyler moved to another part of town. She came to the last court hearing with a hangover. She had celebrated her freedom the night before. She almost fainted in the courtroom, but she stood up straight and answered clearly. Tyler tried to catch her eye, but she only looked at the judge. When it was over, he caught up with her in the hallway. "How about a coffee? Let's talk?" "There's nothing to talk about. Everything's been decided." Work became her salvation. Eva took on any challenge and often stayed late. Her colleagues were surprised by her sudden workaholism, but she just waved it off, saying she needed something to occupy her time. She was valued at the hospital. She was a good specialist and knew all the ins and outs of complex equipment. When the chief engineer retired, she was offered his position. Eva accepted without hesitation. The new position required constant attention. Now she was responsible for all the equipment in the hospital, managed a team of technicians, and drew up maintenance schedules. She worked from morning till night, often forgetting to eat. She didn't drink less. She just learned to hide it better. Now she always had cognac diluted with coffee in her thermos so it wouldn't smell. In her bag, she carried mint candies and a special breath freshener spray. One day she accidentally ran into Rosalie at the supermarket. She now worked in a private laboratory. Eva found out from her father. They pretended not to notice each other. In the evenings, melancholy descended on the empty apartment. Eva turned up the TV so she couldn't hear her own thoughts. Sometimes her father called, inviting her to dinner, but she found excuses to decline. She didn't want him to see her in that state. At work, she was respected but kept at a distance. She became tougher and more demanding. She would scold technicians for the slightest mistake and make them redo reports several times. On her birthday, she got so drunk that she couldn't go to work. She called in and said she had the flu. Her father came over with soup, but she didn't open the door. She just wrote a message saying that everything was fine and she just wanted to be alone. Gradually, a new rhythm of life emerged. The morning began with checking the equipment and a planning meeting with the technicians. Then she would make her rounds of the departments, work on documents, and meet with suppliers. In the evening, she would have a glass of wine, then a second, then a third. Then back to work, this time at home on her laptop. One day, a new CT scanner was delivered to the hospital. Eva spent 3 days setting it up, checking every parameter. She slept in fits and starts in the doctor's office. When everything was working, the chief physician shook her hand personally. That evening, for the first time in a long time, she didn't drink. She just came home, took a shower, and fell asleep. She woke up in the morning with a clear head and a strange feeling, as if something had changed. At work, she was different, calm, collected. The technicians looked at each other in surprise but said nothing. By evening, she realized that her head worked better when it wasn't foggy from alcohol. At home, Eva took a bottle of whiskey out of the closet and stared at it for a long time. Then she resolutely poured the contents into the sink. Next went the wine, the cognac, even the thermos from her bag. The morning was difficult. Her hands were shaking and her head was splitting. But she made it to work, held a planning meeting, and checked the new tomograph. In the evening, she called her father, the first time she had done so in a long time. "Dad, maybe we could have dinner together." He paused for a second, then asked, "Are you okay?" "No, but I think I will be." Work was still the most important thing in her life. But now it wasn't a way to escape reality, just something she loved doing. She really was a good specialist, and finally she could prove it again. The divorce papers lay untouched in her desk drawer. Once she took them out and reread them. 2 signatures, a court seal, and 15 years of her life were officially over. For some reason it seemed funny, so simple, so mundane. Eva put the documents back in the drawer. Tomorrow was an important day. New equipment was being delivered to the cardiology department. She had to supervise the installation and check all the settings. She would manage. Now she knew that for sure. Her ex-husband and ex-girlfriend could live their lives as they wished. It was no longer her story. Eva didn't like this supermarket. It was too big, noisy, and always crowded. But there were good discounts here, and after the divorce, she had to watch her money. Her new job paid well, but her rent and car loan took up most of her salary. That evening, she stayed late at work. They were installing new equipment in the pediatric ward. She arrived at the store at 9, when the main rush of shoppers had subsided. She slowly rolled her cart between the aisles, checking the list on her phone. She noticed Margaret by the cereal shelves. She was standing there comparing the prices of different types of rice. Her first impulse was to turn around and leave, but for some reason Eva hesitated. Over the past year, she had seen Rosalie several times from a distance, and Tyler once, but she had never met her friend's parents. Margaret looked up and noticed her. She froze for a second, then walked decisively toward her. Eva involuntarily took a step back. "Hello," Margaret's voice sounded unusually hoarse. "How are you?" "Fine, working. I heard you got a promotion. James told me. Wilford mentioned it." They were standing in the middle of the aisle, blocking other shoppers. A woman with a baby carriage pushed past them impatiently. "Would you like to get some coffee?" Margaret suggested suddenly. "There's a nice cafe upstairs." Eva wanted to refuse, but unexpectedly nodded. They left their carts at the checkout and went up to the second floor. The cafe was almost empty. Margaret ordered a cappuccino. Eva ordered green tea. A year ago, she would have definitely added cognac from a flask, but now the flask was a thing of the past. "You've lost weight," Margaret remarked, "and you look tired. A lot of work, new job, new responsibilities. What about your personal life?" "No, I don't have time for that." They were silent for a moment. Margaret twirled her cup in her hands, clearly searching for the right words. "You know, I often think back to when you and Rosalie were children, how you played together, how you shared secrets." "Don't," Eva frowned. "Let's not talk about that. I'm sorry. It's just, I miss those times. Our family dinners, talking with your mother. Your mother would not have approved of your daughter's behavior." Margaret flinched but nodded. "Yes, you're right. We don't approve either. Rosalie, she's done some stupid things." "How is she?" Eva blurted out against her will. "She works in a private laboratory. She lives with my sister-in-law. She and Tyler aren't in touch, at least, I don't think so." "And him?" "I don't know. James sometimes sees him in town, but they don't talk." Silence fell again. It was getting dark outside, and the lights came on in the cafe. Eva looked at her watch. It was almost 10. "I have to go. I have to get up early tomorrow." "Of course," Margaret stood up. "You know, I'm glad we met, and that we got to talk." At the elevator, she suddenly touched Eva's hand. "You know that James and I loved you like family, right?" "I know. That's why it hurts so much." They went downstairs and picked up their carts. At the exit, Margaret turned around. "Maybe sometime we could have lunch together?" "I don't think that's a good idea." In the parking lot, they went their separate ways. Eva got into her car but didn't rush to start the engine. Memories swirled in her head. Her and Rosalie doing homework in the Stevens kitchen, Margaret teaching them how to bake cookies, everyone going on a picnic together. Her phone beeped, a message from her father. "How are you? Are you coming over tomorrow?" "Yes," she replied. "Later, though. I have a lot of work to do." On the way home, Eva thought about the strangeness of life. A year ago, she couldn't have imagined that she would be calmly talking to the mother of the woman who had destroyed her marriage. And today, that conversation seemed almost normal. At home, she was unpacking her groceries and suddenly realized she had forgotten to buy rice. The same rice Margaret had been looking at. For some reason, it seemed symbolic, like a piece of her past life that she had left behind at the store. That evening, her father's old Ford started acting up. Wilford called Eve. She knew engines better than anyone, having helped him in the workshop since she was a child. His voice sounded guilty. He knew his daughter was avoiding visiting him, using work as an excuse. The garage smelled of motor oil and burnt wiring. Her father was fiddling with the engine, cursing under his breath. "Let me take a look," she said, rolling up her sleeves as usual. They worked in silence. Her father handed her tools and Eva dug into the engine. It was like old times when she was a girl and thought there was nothing more interesting than tinkering with cars. "Here," she straightened up. "The wiring is burnt out. I'll bring a new one tomorrow and we'll replace it. Go wash up, her father nodded toward the house. I think you left some clothes in your room. Eva stood under the shower for a long time, washing off the machine oil and the fatigue of the working day. She found some old jeans and a t-shirt in the closet. She sometimes spent the weekend at her father's house when she helped with repairs. Her father was heating up dinner in the kitchen. She sat down at the table, and suddenly something familiar and dear in his movements. The way he stirred the soup, checked if it was hot enough, took out the bread, struck her with a sharp pang of homesickness, and it overwhelmed her. First, nervous laughter. She giggled, unable to stop, then tears. Her father sat down silently beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. "I'm so tired, Dad," she sobbed. "So tired of being strong, of keeping up appearances. At work, I'm a perfect professional. At home, I'm an unyielding woman who doesn't care about her husband's infidelity. But I'm just so damn tired." She talked and talked about betrayal, about pain, about how she tried to drown it all in alcohol, about sleepless nights in an empty apartment, about trying to lose herself in work. And you know what's funny? She lifted her tear-stained face. "I'm not even angry at them anymore. I just feel empty inside, like everything's burned out. It'll pass." Her father stroked her head like he did when she was a child. "Everything will pass." "Did you really want to kill him?" "Who?" "Tyler, when you threatened to drown him in the canal." Her father chuckled. "No, of course not. I just wanted to scare him. To protect you, the best way I knew how." "That's a stupid way to do it." "Well, I'm not the smartest person in the world, especially when it comes to my girl." She smiled weakly through her tears. The soup had long since grown cold, but they all sat in the kitchen and talked. For the first time in months, they really talked. About everything. About her mother. About the past. About the future. About how stupid it was to avoid each other when they really needed support. Eva stayed the night in her old room. She lay awake, listening to the familiar sounds of the house, the creaking floorboards, the rustling of branches outside the window. In the morning, she woke up with a surprisingly clear head. It was as if the fog of the last few months had finally lifted. She washed her face, looked in the mirror, and barely recognized her own face. It was as if something gray and sick that had settled in her after the divorce had been washed away overnight. Her father was already making breakfast in the kitchen. "Coffee?" "Yes, please. Black, no additives." He nodded understandingly. Later, they went to buy some electrical wiring and replaced it in the car. Then her father showed her which fence needed to be painted over the weekend. They made plans as if those months of estrangement had never happened. Before leaving, Eva hugged her father. "Thank you." "For what?" "For just being there, even when I didn't want you to be." He nodded silently. Words were unnecessary. 2 years flew by unnoticed. Eva went to a medical conference as the hospital's chief engineer. She needed to look at new equipment for the oncology department. After that memorable evening with her father, she felt as if she had awakened from a long sleep. First, she made an appointment with a psychiatrist, just to check if everything was okay. It turned out that it wasn't, and the doctor diagnosed her with severe depression, which she had managed to endure on her own. "You know," Dr. Braithman said after several sessions, "you are incredibly lucky. It's a 1 in a million chance to pull yourself out of a state like that on your own." Then he added in a lower voice, "And strangely enough, alcohol helped you. It blocked certain processes in your brain and prevented the situation from becoming completely critical. Although, of course, it's not a method of treatment." Gradually, life began to improve. Eva bought a small house near her work. She was tired of renting apartments. On weekends, she pottered around in the garden and learned how to grow roses. Her father helped with repairs, and they often spent evenings in the garage tinkering with his old Ford. She arrived at the conference early, wanting to look around before the presentations began. The hotel lobby was crowded with doctors, engineers, and representatives of manufacturing companies. She was studying the program when she heard a familiar voice. "Eva?" She turned around. Tyler was standing a few steps away, looking as fit as ever, only his temples were completely gray. His badge read, Medical Systems Representative. "Hello," she said, surprised at how calm her voice sounded. "You look well." She knew it was true. Her complexion was healthy, her eyes were clear, and she had a calm smile. She was nothing like the exhausted woman she had been 2 years ago. "Thank you. You look good, too." "Change jobs." He nodded awkwardly at his badge. "I'm in medical equipment now," I noticed. In the awkward pause that followed, they looked at each other. Two people who had once been the closest in the world. "Would you like to get a coffee?" he suggested. "Just talk." She thought about it. 2 years ago, she would have refused without hesitation. But now everything was different. "Sure, I have half an hour before my first class." The cafe was not very crowded. They ordered coffee and sat down at a table by the window. "How are you?" Tyler asked. "I'm good, really good. I bought a house and am growing roses. Work is great," he nodded. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy. And you? How are you?" "Fine. Working a lot, seeing someone." "Rosalie?" "No," he shook his head. It was a mistake, a big mistake." Eva took a sip of her coffee. Strangely, the conversation caused neither pain nor bitterness. It was as if they were discussing a book they had read long ago. "You know," she said, "I should thank you." "For what?" He raised his eyebrows in surprise. "For everything that happened. If it hadn't been for that, I would never have known how strong I could be, how alive." Tyler was silent for a long time, then said quietly, "I'm sorry. For everything. I forgave you. A long time ago." They talked a little more, about work, mutual acquaintances. He told her that his parents had moved to Florida. She told him that her father had finally sold the old Ford and bought a new car. When it was time to go to the presentations, they said goodbye calmly, like business associates. "Take care," Tyler said. "You take care too." She spent the whole day listening to presentations, talking to colleagues and studying the specifications of new equipment. In the evening, she called her father and told him about the conference and her meeting with Tyler. "How are you?" he asked anxiously. "Fine, Dad. Can you believe it? I'm totally fine." In her hotel room, she stood at the window for a long time, looking at the city at night. 2 years ago, this meeting would have shattered her. Today, it was just another confirmation that her life was really getting better. Tomorrow was an important day, the presentation of a new tomograph, price negotiations, paperwork, and the meeting with her ex-husband, just an episode, nothing more. As she fell asleep, she smiled. A free life, unburdened by the past. She deserved it, with her pain, her strength, her ability to start over. James had died in his auto parts store. A heart attack had struck him right at his desk. He had managed to reconcile with his daughter a month earlier. Rosalie had finally mustered the courage to come and talk things through. Many people came to the funeral. James was well known and respected in the town. Ava stood next to Margaret, holding her hand. Over the past year, they had met occasionally. They had coffee and talked about life. Not often, maybe once every couple of months, but these meetings had become important to both of them. Wilford was one of the first to arrive, helping with the arrangements and supporting his old friend. He and James had remained close all these years, continuing to meet on weekends, tinkering with cars, and sometimes going fishing. Tyler came back toward the end of his service and kept to himself. He traveled a lot for work, representing medical equipment at various clinics. He remarried to a doctor from Seattle whom he met at a conference. Rosalie worked in a research laboratory in a neighboring town. She came to visit her parents every weekend, trying to make up for lost time. When her father was hospitalized with his first stroke, she never left his side. After the service, everyone gathered at the Stevens house. Margaret mechanically set out the cups. The familiar movements helped her not to think. Eva helped her in the kitchen just like in the old days. Wilford talked quietly with one of James's old friends. Tyler lingered briefly in the living room, offered his condolences, and left. His wife and newborn son were waiting for him at home. Rosalie sat in the corner, leafing through an old photo album. Their life before that ill-fated romance, family dinners, holidays, trips together, everything seemed so simple and clear. Ava placed a cup of tea in front of her. "Are you holding up?" "Trying," Rosalie said, raising her reddened eyes. "Thank you for coming. He was a good man." "Yes, I didn't deserve a father like him." Eva was silent. Some things are better left unsaid. Gradually, the guests left. Only the closest ones remained: Wilford, Eva, and Rosalie. Margaret sank into an armchair, clutching a photograph of her husband. "You know," she said suddenly, "James said before he died that everything was for the best, that sometimes you have to go through pain to become stronger." Rosalie quietly sniffed. Eva mechanically stirred her cold tea. Wilford stared out the window at the setting sun. "Maybe he was right," Margaret continued. "We've all changed. Grown up, I guess." A silence fell over the room, not a heavy one, just pensive. Everyone remembered those 3 years, which had been so different for all of them. Later, in the car, Eva said to her father, "It's strange how it all turned out. It's like we forgave each other, but there's no going back now." "And we don't need to," replied Wilford. "The past is the past. The important thing is to learn to live on." She nodded. The scars would remain forever, but they no longer hurt. They were simply reminders of what they had been through. At home, Eva stood at the window for a long time, looking at her little garden. The roses should be blooming any day now. She had learned to grow them, just as she had learned to live again. James was right. Sometimes you have to go through pain to become stronger, and tomorrow would be a new day. Life goes on, a different life, but life nonetheless.